ruin the world or save it. It's all in the hands of the player.
Dynasty update in 3 words. Awesome marriages to different people. That's more words.
The Bronze Age, a time of epic heroes and unending strife. I'm Steve Coleman, joined today by Todor Nikolov, exploring the massively expanded campaign map coming in Total War Pharaoh Dynasties. So, let's start with the top line of everything that's been added to the campaign map. New settlements, factions, what have we got?
Yes, what we did was get the campaign map of Pharaoh and expand it significantly to the west and to the east, and a smidgen to the north, with a lot of new factions that you can play as, fight against, or ally or barter with. There are a number of new settlements, about 160 new ones in fact, and about 100 new factions, I believe. Some of them are major players, major factions, because we introduced that distinction in the game with the Dynasty update. There are major factions, like the ones that you have already played in Pharaoh, and there are also minor factions that are a lot more in number, and they're mainly there to provide the player with an additional starting position opportunities. They allow the player also to play as significant Bronze Age players, kingdoms or tribes. And also they are there because they are either characters from the Iliad related to the Aegean region, or they are there because they are related to characters from Pharaoh, like Setnacht.
Setnacht is Ramesses' father, right? Where does he start?
Yes, exactly. This is the father of Ramesses III, and he starts in the Western Desert, very close to the coast of the Mediterranean. And from this position, he's got the option to expand further into the desert to the west, to the south. Also, in both places, he's likely to be fighting against Libyan tribes. Also, he can go to the east, where he will inevitably meet with his son Ramesses and perhaps form an alliance to get an easier time getting the crown.
The Western Desert is just a jaunt across the ocean to Greece, right? So how did you approach combining Troy with Pharaoh?
Well, first of all, we had to scale down the campaign map for Troy in order for it to fit the scale of Pharaoh's campaign map. That means that some settlements had to be dropped, and there are about 80 new settlements that are included in the Aegean portion of the map. We also had to rework some of the character art because we wanted to make them more historic. Their armors were a bit more flamboyant, and I'm looking at you, Hector, and you, Achilles. So another thing that we had to compromise with was the presence of the Amazons. We could find no feasible explanation on why they would be present in actual history, so there are no Amazons.
But you have added the Black Sea?
Yes, we added the Black Sea because we really wanted to have a complete map of Anatolia, and the Black Sea coast is right over there, so there was no reason not to include it. We also discovered that when we combined the regions from Troy and from Pharaoh, that there is a significant gap right in the middle portion of Western Anatolia, so we had to add a few regions over there. But now Anatolia is complete. You can conquer the whole of it, and you can carve another Hittite empire for yourselves if you want to.
And Mesopotamia has been added as well, right? It looks absolutely stunning. What inspired the art style of this region? Are there any landmarks that you're particularly proud of?
For Mesopotamia, we really wanted to create the impression of the cradle of civilization kind of place in the world, where you have fertile land surrounded by hostile territory, much like it is in Egypt, but it also had to look and feel distinct from Egypt. And it's not that hard because there is a single great river in Egypt, the Nile, and there are two of those in Mesopotamia, the Tigris and the Euphrates. So right in the middle, you can find yourself a safe zone, a safe area, because both rivers are natural borders that protect you somewhat from either from invading tribes from the southwest or those Elamites from the east. They're always there, the Elamites. As for any particular landmarks, the city of Babylon is there with a unique battle map inspired by the actual layout of the city at the time, and it's really impressive. And in addition to that, Ziggurat of Ur, which we have added as a monument on the campaign map that you can interact with as an outpost. This structure was built 800 years roughly before the events of the game, but is still standing over there today, monument to the entire civilization of humanity.
So there we are, 2 new land masses, 168 new settlements, 95 new factions, and the inclusion of playable minor factions. We've had the overview, let's dive a little bit further into Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, it's a whole new world to explore and conquer. But who are the players? What are the rules? Let's find out. Let's start in Babylon. What makes them special? How do they play?
Well, Babylonians are generally the faction that builds tall. They want to get prepared before they march off on the offensive. So their buildings, for example, often combine different effects, so you can achieve more with a single building. Their command allows them to suddenly increase their recruitment capabilities, which helps both when you defend your lands and when you attack your enemies. And in addition, they have access to the city of Babylon, which is a one-settlement province and is rather huge. In addition to that, they're relying on the god Marduk for a variety of bonuses that help them on the defensive, like unit upkeep and replenishment.
Yes, so the Mesopotamian gods, we've got Ninurta, Ashur, Ishtar, Inshushinak, and Marduk, right? And they have dwellings. Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Dwellings is an additional building that represents the home of a particular god, and you can build a home to a god in every one of your settlements for an additional drop of favor and some god-specific effects. So you have your temples, you have your shrines. If you are praying to Mesopotamian gods, you have your dwellings, and this means that you can actually maximize the favor tier to a god with much fewer territories, which is very valuable for the Babylonians in particular.
Okay, so it sounds like the Babylonians are quite an inward-looking faction. Marduk's a good fit for them god-wise, but what ancient legacy would you say would best suit them?
It would definitely be the ancient legacy of Hammurabi, the creator of one of the first code of laws. And this is what the player can do with the ancient legacy. They can have their own code of laws. And each law is a combination of effects that you choose from a list. And this might be both positive, which brings you bonuses, but also takes more time, or penalties. You can also put negative effects to reduce the time it takes for a law to be efficient. In addition to that, the more laws you have, the more Kuduru resource you receive, and you can spend this to instantly research royal decrees or also research greater and more powerful effects for your laws.
Great, okay, so the opposite of an inward-looking faction might be an ambitious one. Hanigalbat has entered the fray. What are they like?
Yes, Hanigalbat are actually a kingdom of Assyrians, and their ruler really very much likes to be the ruler of the entire Assyria, so they're much more on the offensive. They can recruit from very early in the campaign a lot of units. They can also create buildings which provide them with experienced generals that come at a very affordable price. And in addition to that, they also have horsemen from very early in the campaign. Horsemen are quite fragile, but also more maneuverable than chariots. Their faction command in particular grants them a resource, military training, which scales with the number of ongoing wars. And you can spend this resource to directly upgrade your units in an army of your choice, which means that you need to go completely total war. The more wars you are participating in, the stronger your armies will get.
Okay, so would you say they fancied themselves as a kind of king of the universe then?
Yes, quite. King of the Universe is actually the title of the supreme ruler of the Mesopotamian court. And the main difference between the Mesopotamian court and the court of other great powers at the time was that the Mesopotamian court and King of the Universe had under him not a vizier or a high priest or whatever. He had kings below him, and in the game these are the king of Hanigalbat, the king of Ashur, the king of Elam, and the king of Babylon. Each of those positions, the lesser kings, comes with their own plots and intrigues and elite units. Actually, it's a bit of a trivia that the first king who used the King of the Universe title likely was Sargon of Akkad, Sargon the Great.
And to get their hands on the throne, the Sargon of Akkad Ancient Legacy sounds perfect.
Yes, quite. The Ancient Legacy of Sargon is all about ambition. With it, you can have more ambitions at a time. You can have control over what kind of ambitions you receive, because there are different ambition archetypes. Some are related to politics, some are related to warfare. By completing these ambitions of a certain archetype, you get points, which in turn unlock you additional bonuses that are relevant to the archetype. So if you complete warlike ambitions, you will get more bonuses that help you in war. In addition to that, with this Ancient Legacy, you gain access to Grand Ambitions, which provide you with the opportunity to complete more different and more difficult objectives, but also their rewards are much greater, and they provide you with victory points. And in this way, they are a valid way for you to achieve a campaign victory along with your ordinary conquering the world.
Prince of Ur and Protector of Nippur.
So there we are, 1 new culture, 7 total playable factions, 2 new ancient legacies, new gods and related mechanics, and new regalia to chase. The ancient world is spilling its secrets, but let's go see some old friends in the Aegean. Homer's Iliad describes the Trojan War in epic poetry. But what really happened? Defining our own history is part of Total War's core experience, and the Aegean is a theatre ripe for exploration. All right, Mycenae, we know these guys. How do they play?
The Mycenaeans are led by Agamemnon, and they're all about conquest and expansion. They're extremely adept at pacifying conquered territories. They also have benefits for their buildings from when their high influence is achieved. So when you conquer territories and you pacify them, you quickly make them more efficient than other factions would. In addition to that, their command grants them access to instantly recruited units and ancillaries that scale with the level of the faction leader. So when you get your faction leader to a high level, you can instantly buff their army, which will help them get out of tight spots.
Okay, it sounds to me like they'd be a good fit for the Atreus Ancient Legacy.
Yes, quite right. The Atreus Ancient Legacy allows you to literally dominate over your enemies, because when you complete different objectives against them, you gain this dominance resource, and then you can spend it in diplomacy to boost the probability of your deals being accepted, strong arm them. You can also spend it instead of regard in the court to achieve various plots and intrigues over there. And you can also use it as legitimacy. So this Ancient Legacy is actually the representation of the warlord who has proven his worth and now is using his prestige to achieve his goals.
They sound like they'd worship Ares or Zeus, maybe? Who else do we have, though? We've got Poseidon, Zeus, Ares, Apollo, and Aphrodite. And you can perform hecatombs for them? What are they?
Yes, hecatombs are a perk of the Aegean pantheon of the gods. It's something that happens only with the Aegean gods. And a hecatomb is a sacrifice that you need to spend food to enact. Every time you perform a hecatomb, all of your generals receive the effects of a prayer to the particular god, as if though they have visited a shrine, which means, again, a boost across all of your armies, depending on the gods that you're performing this sacrifice to.
I feel like Troy would worship Apollo. Just feels about right for me. Priam, though, that's unexpected. What other surprises are the Trojans hiding for us?
Yes, we've got Priam and also his sons Hector and Paris as playable characters. Priam is quite, experienced and a powerful character, especially in the beginning of your campaign, but it also makes a lot of sense for you to level up Hector and Paris because at some point Priam will die and the crown will likely pass to some of them or to another person that you choose. Trojans are all about diplomacy. They have various ways to increase their diplomacy standing. They also benefit from having foreign influence in their lands because the presence of foreign people provides them with income of gold, and it also debuffs any armies that dare to march against the holy city of Troy.
Okay, so the Perseus ancient legacy is probably more in line with Troy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that one?
Yes, it very much fits this sort of a master diplomat profile that the Trojans have. In the ancient legacy of Perseus, first of all, it grants you the ability to globally recruit units from any point on the map, and these are not only units from your roster, but also from the units of any allies that you might have, military, defensive, or even vassals. You gain access to their rosters as well. The more allies you have and the bigger allies you have, the more you have of the unity resource, and the more unity resource you have, the better the global recruitment you can do. In addition to that, as another source of unity, you can conduct games where you spend ancillaries to invite factions, and you gain a bit of unity. You also get some economic resources, and in addition to that, you enforce peace between all participants and yourself. But be careful with that. Be mindful of the cooldown and also the fact that you need ancillaries to start the games in the first place.
Okay, well, it's a good thing Priam starts as the Wanax then. So how is a Wanax different from a Pharaoh or Hittite Great King?
The Wanax is mainly different due to the royal powers that the Wanax has at his disposal. One of those is war games, another type of games. The Mycenaeans must have been loving games. And you initiate these war games to increase your unit's experience. Another very useful power, especially as the Bronze Age collapses around you, is remote colonization. You target an empty settlement, a raised one, and you will instantly colonize it. Of course, there are limitations to this. First, there is range. You can't instantly colonize a settlement on the other side of a campaign map, at least not at first. You need to have vision over the settlement as well. So it is technically possible to colonize a settlement in Egypt from Troy, but it will take quite a bit of preparation and particular leveling up of your Wanax powers.
There we are, a familiar culture, another 7 total playable factions, new ancient legacies, gods and thrones to contend with. But the passing of Priam leaves a vacuum in the Aegean. Who will fill it? Who will continue the Aegean dynasty? The death of a pharaoh was an occasion marked by celebration, mourning and mummification. But the world doesn't end when a king dies. Someone always takes up the mantle. Let's take a look at ruling families then. How do they work?
The ruling families are a representation of the family of your faction leader. Over there you can see the relations between the different characters. They might be children or parents or siblings. They might be married to each other. And from this screen you can point the scion. The scion is the character who will inherit the faction in case the faction leader dies, which is in most cases inevitable.
Oh, so you're telling me Ajax gets older and can die?
Well, yes, even Ajax is a man. However, we have thought of fans of Ajax in particular, and for them, we have included customization option that allows you to tweak the number of turns that it takes for an year to pass. So, for example, you might want to play with characters that quickly age and they change with new ones. Then you can select each turn to last for a year, or you could slow things down and reach up to 12 turns per year. And if you really do not want to lose Ajax at all, you can have immortal characters which act just like they do in Pharaoh. Of course, this is absolutely ahistorical unless you consider vampires history.
Let's say, for example, that I had a really bad campaign and my entire family got wiped out. What would happen then?
If potentially you got yourself into that situation, this does not mean that your campaign ends, but in case your entire family gets wiped out, a random character will conveniently arise to take over and become the next faction leader. But you will likely have to face some considerable penalties because your people, your populace will not be happy with such a transition, and they will likely consider it illegitimate, and there will be disorder around your faction.
So, let's say I'm the ruling pharaoh, or the great king, or the Wanax, of course, or the king of the universe.
Yeah.
What changes in the ruling family mechanic?
The changes are, first of all, you see not only your faction, but all members of the dynasty. So, for example, there might be faction leaders that belong to other factions. Let's say the Egyptian starting position. You have Merneptah and all of his children that all are faction leaders to different factions. This is one aspect. Another thing is that you can have an overview of the history of your entire dynasty, so yourself, any previous rulers, and all of their deeds. Deeds are events that take place during your campaign. They're recorded over there, both your successes and your failures. And based on your deeds, you can unlock epithets. These are kind of small titles that you can customize your faction leader name with. And they are really a reflection of what you have done in your campaign. You might have conquered a lot of settlements, which means that you will be known as Ramesses the Conqueror. Or perhaps you have lost a lot of settlements. Then you might be called Ramesses the Inept Defender or something like that. In addition to all of these, when you become part of a dynasty, you can also arrange political marriages.
Okay, so you're saying I can strengthen my ties with other factions by giving away my children? Well, other than sounding fantastic, what else can I do in diplomacy?
Well, yes, giving away your children is one of the things that you can do. This is called in the game diplomatic marriage, where either you give away one of your characters or take a foreign character in marriage, which will increase the diplomatic relations between yourself and another faction. The political marriage is something similar. However, in a political marriage, each character remains in their faction. There is again better diplomacy, better relations between the factions, but it requires some sort of diplomatic treaty before it can happen, at least a non-aggression pact between the factions. What else you can do? You can force inheritance. This is a new diplomatic action which sends one of your characters to another faction where they're automatically selected as the scion who will inherit the rule of the faction once the faction leader is dead. And once this happens, you will have a relative ruling another faction, which will vastly increase your diplomatic relations. This is something which I usually do with Paris when I play Troy. I send him off to another faction so that he can become the scion and then come back to me with the faction itself. In addition to all of that, you can also trade with and barter legitimacy in diplomacy with the dynasty update. So you can exchange economic resources for someone else's legitimacy to boost your own, or you can sell your own legitimacy for resources. Although this might not be a good idea if you are preparing for any civil wars.
With more campaign customization options and reworks like time per turn and updated legacy traditions, there's never been more ways to tweak your playstyle. And speaking of playstyle tweaks, let's join Milcho to find out a bit more about battles. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present Camels. I'm joined by Milcho Vasilev, looking at battles. Right, so battles have been updated. We now have lethality, visibility updates, tweaked missile trajectories, and a lot more. Can you tell us a bit about the lethality system to start with?
Okay, so lethality is a new system which we are introducing to the battles, which would help make the battles feel a lot more impactful and visceral and cinematic in a way. Basically what lethality does, it adds a percentage chance every time a blow is landed for it to be lethal outright and kill the opponent immediately. This works both for melee weapons and for ranged weapons, which can really be noticed on the battlefield. And because of that, to make sure that the pacing of the battles remains slow and tactical, how we want it for Pharaoh, we made sure to rework all the units and all their stats to make sure that they include this lethality and it works as we intend it to be. Lethality helps us add new finishing animations because it now happens faster in that regard, and it makes the battles really feel more cinematic in that way.
Great, okay. And what about the tweaked missile trajectories and the updates to visibility?
Okay, so we wanted to make sure that the missile weapons feel as realistic as possible. We know how in the real world they often show us archers shooting at those huge arcs, aiming high and then shooting at enemies so far, but actually a bow is, or even slings, are much more effective when they're being shot directly because none of the force is being wasted. We wanted to make sure to represent that well in the game, and so we are making the trajectories of the weapons be more dynamic, whereas the units can choose if they want to shoot directly at enemies or choose to shoot with an arcing shot, and this will result in different damage and different lethality. In terms of visibility, we are doing an update of how it works in the game to make sure that we are adding another tactical layer on the battlefield by making sure that players can more easily outmaneuver their opponents by keeping units hidden and so on. The way units hide in forests will now work slightly differently, and the way they see when they're out of forests is also being improved to make it feel more realistic. Now you can also hide units behind forests or obstacles, not just inside them, the way it was in the original game. Overall visibility of units have been tweaked, and so now units that are more armored have larger helmets that impede their sight in a way. We'll have more trouble noticing enemies that are not too close to them, whereas other unit types are going to be more like scouts that players can use to try and find the enemies on the battlefield and thus gain more knowledge on the enemy's tactics and outmaneuver them.
Awesome. Okay, so speaking of units, there's a ton of new ones coming to the game in the update. Let's home in on a few of them now. Let's look at Mesopotamia. Do you have any particular favorites? And can you tell us a bit about their strengths and weaknesses in combat?
So Mesopotamia is mostly divided into two distinct rosters, the Assyrians and the Babylonians. The Assyrians are much more elite, low numbers and specialized, but they do actually have a cavalry, which opens up a lot of new tactical possibilities on the battle map. Babylonians, on the other hand, rely on a lot of very cheap but numerous units that are not that good in battles by themselves, but they are supported by the so-called taskmaster unit types that allow them to become stronger when they are around. So positioning your army and positioning your units correctly when playing the Babylonians or playing against them, it's going to be vital and very important.
Okay. What's changed in the Aegean? What are the Greeks bringing in terms of their strengths and weaknesses?
So we are reintroducing a lot of the units that we had in Troy in Total War Pharaoh. All of the units from Troy needed a rework to make sure that they fit the frame of Pharaoh in those slower paced, more tactical battles. Most of their abilities, their stats, they have been completely reworked. In terms of the Mycenaeans and the Trojans, we are keeping the flavor of the armies, where the Trojans are a very defensive focused faction with some of the biggest shields in the game, like those large figure of 8 shields that they wield. They have almost unbreakable lines, but what they have defense, they lack in offense, where the Mycenaeans excel at. The Mycenaeans are the much more aggressive type of roster that depends more on chargers and shock units that can really pack a punch in the moment of the charge, but cannot stand too long in prolonged melee combat.
Let's have a look at battle maps. Troy had some absolutely beautiful battle maps, and Mesopotamia as well. What are we going to expect in the way of new maps?
Yes, we are reintroducing all the maps that we had in Troy in here in Pharaoh. They have been slightly reworked to make sure they fit in the Pharaoh framework, with adding the new victory points, making the walls of settlements wider, but overall they are going to be the way you saw them in Troy. For the Mesopotamian regions, we are adding a ton of new battle maps, including the city of Babylon itself, with its unique architecture and new unique layout. We are also making the land battles a lot larger than they used to be, to allow for even more tactical outmaneuvering, which the players enjoy in this more slow-paced type of gameplay.
So there we are, 60 new and reworked battle maps including Babylon, 150 new and reworked units including camels and cavalry, updated mechanics, lethality, visibility, trajectories, and so much more. This is Bronze Age Total War, and we can't wait for you to get your hands on Total War Pharaoh Dynasties.
We're finally giving the players a Total War that fits as much of the Bronze Age as possible.
I am excited to be able to conquer a lot more lands and fight different cultures.